Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Trident Talks. I'm joined today by Mike Macpherson, who's the CISO at Insurwave. Mike, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Charlie. Thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
No worries, no worries. I know you've been quite popular on social media, so it's been a lot of good to get you on board. For people who don't know you and what you're doing, would you like to give us a quick background on who you are?
Yep. So I'm currently the Chief Information Security Officer at a company called Insurwave. I've been in the security industry for only 3 years. Before that, I was a network engineer for various different organisations, and the bulk of my career was serving as an engineer in the British Royal Air Force. I spent 14 years in the Air Force, travelling predominantly around the UK and a bit in the Middle East, and it was radar engineering that led me into network engineering, and then I am where I am today. It's been quite an exciting career, but lots of changes and having to adapt along the way.
You've had to adapt quite quickly as well. So being in security, as we know it, for 3 years, and you're already at that CISO level, so you've had to adapt quite quickly. What do you think's aided you in getting into that position where you are today so quickly?
I think fundamentally for me, as yourself and others can appreciate, it's the military experience. So we're taught how to adapt, and how to adapt and overcome is one of the fundamental traits that we learn in the military. And I think originally I took it for granted. I kind of didn't realise that was a trait that I had, but coming into the commercial sector has definitely been a strength of mine. I think I've seen the market change quite quickly. So in sort of early 2011, when I left the military, there was a heavy focus on network engineering. That's what led me into it. But then you quickly start seeing the markets change toward cloud infrastructure and people moving from on-premise to the cloud. And technology started changing, and the way things were being done internally in organizations were changing, and that sort of piqued my interest. And I kept trying to keep ahead of it, and I kept... It's about learning, being able to adapt to your learning environment and never stop learning as well. I think that's what's helped.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. That's an integral part of insecurity. I think what you mentioned about having the ability to adapt and overcome, it's something that's so fast paced. You've got to be able to have the ability to think on your feet, right? So it's good to see. It's always good to see anyone succeed so quickly, especially coming out of the forces as well. What's the hardest thing for you then, being this one-man security team in Insurwave who work in this alongside the insurance sector, right? What's the hardest thing?
I think it's prioritization of work for me. I knew what I was coming into. So when I interviewed initially in March for the role, they asked me the question in the interviews. They said, "What do you think about becoming a traditional CISO?" And everything I'd heard about the way the organisation was structured and all the work that they were currently doing, I quickly turned it on its head in this interview and I said, well, from what you've told me, you're not looking for a traditional CISO. You need a hybrid. You need someone who can be hands-on technically, someone who can talk to the board, someone who can communicate well with different team members, and understand the business in a way that needs to be, needs to be handled. And that's what I went with. It was kind of, imagine a jack of all trades, master of none. And it's having that sort of the sort of 5 mile wide view of security and only 1 inch deep, because that's the way I've learned. That's the way I've had to learn. But I think for me now, after sort of nearly 6 months into the role, it's the continuous change in prioritizations, the change in priorities. Sorry, I think that's probably the biggest challenge being a one-man band.
And definitely, I can imagine everything's changing, right? There's going to be a new problem every single day. But I know you'll be looking to grow your team at some point. Obviously, you can't always be that one-man band. So would you like to give a little bit of information around what Insurwave do?
Yeah, Insurwave are a disruptor in the insurance sector. That's how we're pitching ourselves. So we provide digital pathways for risk owners and organizations who manage risk. Originally, it was born out of a project from Ernst & Young and a company called Guard Time, and they set up the project to try and solve a problem that existed. Insurance is still very legacy in the way insurance is handled. It's still very paperwork driven. There's lots of delays, and we bring technology to the forefront to try and to make things easier for the risk owners. We're not solely focused on marine insurance. We're looking to branch out into commercial property insurance, automotive insurance. So there's lots of changes coming, but our technology platform is at the forefront of what we do. And we take pride in it. It's good team to work for.
Yeah, it sounds it. I've had a look at a few of your videos on the website, etc. So there's a lot of data passing through the system and everything, isn't there? So essentially, when someone makes a change on their policy, you want to streamline that to make sure all parties are kind of kept in up to date and everything, right? And make sure the policies are not void. So there's a lot of sensitive information passing through that. So obviously, security is absolutely paramount with that. So moving on to the next subject then, I know you're very big on mental health and you want to avoid burnout. Everyone wants to avoid burnout, right? Typically, we've seen CISO roles or any high-pressured roles, in fact, within the industry. A lot of people suffer from burnout. So I think typically it's like 18 months within a traditional CISO role or something like that. I'll have to revisit that. What would be your advice in maintaining a good mental state and preventing any burnout to get the most out of your teams and yourself?
I think fundamentally you have to understand that you're in a role and you're performing a function in a business. Although it's a very high pressured role, it's not the be all and end all of life. You've got a job. Everyone's got jobs. There's people who have more critical jobs. The frontline forces have more critical jobs than myself at the moment. And I think to avoid the burnout, you just have to understand that there are other people in the business who can support you, and if there aren't those support networks in the business, then there's an issue with the organizational structure. But for me, in my situation, I've had to leverage different business units to get the work done that I need done, as long as I can articulate why I need it done. And I suppose it's having the empathy with their organizational structure to actually get the work done in a pragmatic way. But you've got to be true to yourself. You can't let the world get on top of your shoulders. You need to have an outlet. You need to have some way of decompressing. You have to talk to people as well. You have to share your problems, outside. I know it's very difficult in security because you can't always talk about what's going on, but you can articulate things to people in a way that doesn't have to be sensitive. You can redact stuff. And, brutally transparent, it was only sort of probably 1-2 weeks ago, I had a breakdown, because everything got on top of me. It was more personal than work, but yeah. I had to speak to someone. I had to speak to, a friend of mine just to get it off my chest, because otherwise it would have started impacting my work, and there would have been things, that would have come to light. So it's just fundamentally about relying or leveraging your support network outside of work, and just realizing that the world is not on your shoulder.
Yeah, it's you're feeling better now, though, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think it was brought on from a combination of finishing a large event that I'd aimed to do a massive endurance run. I didn't complete it, so I came out of that feeling a bit dejected. Mm-hmm. I came up with a knee injury, and then other personal things started climbing on top of that. And when you're injured, you start getting a bit down. You can't exercise, and it was a whole combination of different pressures. But yeah, no, I'm fine now. Thank you for asking.
Good. So it all boils down to communication, right? Understanding your business and not being afraid to ask for support, even if that's within mental health, or you're feeling a bit tired, you're feeling burnt out, or it's just to get the best out of the business and your team's working together. You need to be able to communicate, and we find that not only within the security industry, but as human beings, we struggle to communicate, right? And I think I've seen a few things that because of this whole lockdown, a lot of people kind of been reintroduced into society and they've forgotten how to have a conversation. So it's really good advice that you give there to be able to communicate and leverage the support within your teams and outside of work as well. It's a slight curveball here. What do you think the future of the CISO role is going to look like then? I mean, a lot of people are asking for CISOs who can code, who can script, to have that technical level of understanding. What direction do you think it's heading in? So
exactly that. So you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. So I came into, I think it was a year or so ago, I had a vision of my own of what I wanted my career to look like. And I like being hands-on. I like being, I like speaking to people. I like integrating with different business units. And I kind of set this image in my head that I wanted to be known as a chief security engineer, because it was kind of like the C-suite level engineer, like a chief software architect kind of thing. And I couldn't see the title out there, so I just kept it to myself. And and then one day, I think one of my business leaders at the time introduced me on a call as his chief security engineer, and I couldn't believe it. It was like I just put it out there in the universe. But to answer your question, it's exactly that. I think traditional CISOs have lost the understanding of what it is to be a tech. They've all come from tech backgrounds predominantly, but technology has moved on so much that, and they maybe haven't had the time or inclination to keep up with it. Mm-hmm. That there needs to be at least that understanding of tech. It doesn't mean you have to be able to code, but you have to understand what the coders are doing, the developers are doing. You have to be able to talk to them at their level. Modern CISOs need to have empathy for all elements of the organization. They need to have that tech understanding. And I think there's going to be a drive for more hybrid CISOs because people are going to want more for their money. Organizations are going to want more for their money. They don't want someone just to come in and define strategy. They want someone to think outside the box and run things ad hoc at the same time, be able to prioritize different workloads, work streams. And there's a couple of peers in the industry who are doing exactly what I'm doing. They're running a security element of the organization on zero budget, because it can be done. And it doesn't mean that I'm not spending money on native cloud tooling and things like that, but I've asked for a budget. I haven't been given the budget, but that doesn't mean that I can't still operate in a secure manner. There's things I can do. So I think that's going to be the new wave is, we've seen, as you mentioned earlier, we've seen organizations starting to cut back on costs and starting to realize that they can lean up their organizations from a personnel perspective or an office footprint perspective. And I think the next generation of security professionals is going to be a case of like, okay, how can we get the same quality of candidate to run our security function, but on a leaner model?
Yeah. So it's almost as if you're saying that CISOs should almost re-immerse themselves back into the market, as if they were, into the environment, as if they were starting again, just to get a good understanding of what's actually changed on the ground, so to speak. Some good advice there. And what would be, just quickly, what would be your advice to someone who wants to become a CISO in a relatively short space of time? What attributes, apart from having the ability to adapt and overcome, what advice would you give to them?
I think fundamentally you've got to be able to talk about security. If you can articulate security to any audience, that's when you're going to be a good asset to any organization, irrelevant of skills, qualifications, experience. I think if you've got empathy for people, you can talk about security in an articulate manner to any audience. You do have to have some experience to operate at this level. I mean, I've been very fortunate, don't get me wrong. I have had an accelerated career, but it's fundamentally because I've learned those skills from previous employment that it's come to that stage. So I think if someone wants to get into at this level, it's just about networking with your peers, understanding the market, and understanding what it is that an organization are after. I think that's going to be the key thing. Don't just go for every CISO role because you think that's what they want. But there needs to be a change in the industry as well. Organizations need to change their approach because you and I have both seen that organizations are still asking for mythical unicorn type candidates that don't exist. So there has to be a two-way street, I think.
Some solid advice there. And finally, what would you be doing if you weren't a CISO, if you weren't in security?
I miss working at McDonald's. I've worked at McDonald's 4 times in my career. I used to moonlight when I had my 4 days off in the military. So I think I'd be a running coach and I'd work for McDonald's part time.
Nutritional diet for an athlete.
Yeah, well, it worked for. I can't remember who it was. There was a sprinter who used to eat chicken nuggets on the line, but yeah, really? It was not a great advocate for athletic diet, but it was the work ethic, and I think I learned a lot from working at McDonald's because there was a really great team structure. It was a can-do attitude, regardless of some of the customers were complete wallies. It was just forget about it, move on. But I think ultimately I'd want to be a running coach somewhere in the States. I think.
You'll give me some tips. I ran a quite a long distance run the other week, and I haven't been able to run again. But that's for another time. But, Mike, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all.
If anyone's got any questions, I'm sure they'll reach out direct. Thanks once again.
Thanks, Charlie. Take care.
Yes.